Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the Book of Proverbs. Today is the last video in our Proverbs Bible study series as we look at chapter 31, just so you're aware. Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana. I'll put the link to our worship service up above for you to check out at your leisure. Just so you know, this is the second time that I am recording this part of the Bible study today because the first time there was an audio issue that basically destroyed the first half of it to the break. So, I'm going to try it again. If I was a wealthy YouTuber, I would have redundant audio recording. I don't, so I just have to do it all together. This time I'm going to try to record two and then splice it together. So in the middle, you might see a little bit of a blip as things change, but hopefully it won't be too distracting. Proverbs chapter 31 is a continuation of what King Hezekiah's men had sought to write down. So up until Proverbs 25, that's all the wisdom of Solomon. And then this last section, King Hezekiah, generations later, told his scribes, gather up all the stuff we have from Solomon and let's put it in one place and let's add it on to what we had before. And in addition, last week in Proverbs 30, we saw that they collected some wisdom from a guy named Agur, and they tacked it on to the end. And now we're going to have a chapter that has the superscription, the words of King Lemuel. And we're going to say, well, who is Lemuel? And we'll talk about that. And then after the first 9 verses, when we get into chapter 31, verse 10 through 31, there you have the famous Proverbs 31 woman described. And we'll talk about those qualities and why they are arranged, why the chapter is arranged the way that it is. I do think that it was all written by the same author, but they're definitely two distinct parts. This first section are the oracle from King Lemuel's mom, are going to focus primarily on 3 warnings: a warning against promiscuity, a warning against alcoholism or alcohol abuse, and a warning against doing injustice. And then the Proverbs 31 woman that's described is going to be an acrostic poem. And I'll talk about what that means when we get there. So we're going to deal with one section, take the break, which is where I'm going to splice things together, and then we'll come back for the second section. And then that'll be the end to our study of the book of Proverbs. Let's look at the text. Right away, the superscription says the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. A couple things. First of all, I disagree with the translation here that says the words of King Lemuel, because in the Hebrew, I think it actually says the words of a king. So it's not a proper name, King Lemuel. It's a king, and the name Lemuel could actually mean dedicated to God. So any name in Hebrew that ends with El, Samuel, Bethel, those sorts of names are actually constructs or phrases that end with something of God. So Bethel literally means house of God. So Lemuel means dedicated to God. So if we understand this, the words of a king dedicated to God. So a faithful king, I don't think that there was actually a King Lemuel. We don't have a record of any king by that name. We don't know where he came from. Now, it could be that it's an unknown king, sure, but I really think that when we look at the Hebrew, it shows us that these are just the words of an anonymous, faithful king. And he is giving an oracle, that is a prophetic saying, that came from his mom. His mom was apparently wise. She was a godly woman, and the person, the king, took some of that wisdom and wrote it down, and it's tacked on here to the end. Who is this faithful king? Well, if we understand that this is part of the scribes' work for Hezekiah, we could look at it as being Hezekiah's time or maybe a little bit before. King Hezekiah was a king in Judah, right? And so the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, had been conquered by the Assyrians at this time. So who is this king? Well, it has to be a king in Judah, And we know that he's a faithful king. Well, the Bible lists only 2 faithful kings in the land of Judah at that time. There was King Josiah And the other king is Hezekiah. Yeah, the same one who told his scribes to go write down some wisdom, right? So there is a good tradition and a good argument to say that King Lemuel is actually a pseudonym for King Hezekiah. This is backed up also because there's a number of Aramaic phrases and references in the Hebrew here. Now, Aramaic is a different type of language that's similar to Hebrew, but a little bit different. Jesus and his disciples understood Aramaic, even spoke some words in Aramaic that are recorded in Scripture, okay? Often with a translation that says, oh, in Aramaic it's this and it means that sort of thing. But Aramaic didn't really come into the Hebrew language until round about the time of King Hezekiah. So we have several pieces of evidence that all point to the fact that this faithful, anonymous king who is dedicated to God is actually King Hezekiah. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. So Hezekiah's scribes go out, they gather Proverbs of Solomon, they put them together with the previous Proverbs of Solomon. They also find this guy Agur, and they say, hey, he's got some wise stuff, let's put it in there. And then they also say, hey, Hezekiah, you wrote some pretty wise stuff too that seems to be along the same line, and we recognize it as this is wisdom from God too. And Hezekiah was probably like, I can't tell you to go write a book of wisdom and then put my wisdom in at the end. That just looks self-serving, right? Well, okay, we'll give you a pseudonym, right? Possible. He's a king who's dedicated to God. It could very well be Hezekiah. Maybe, maybe not, but I think it is. So I might use King Lemuel, King Hezekiah as sort of interchangeably in here, just so you're aware. Okay. The words of his mom, the wisdom of his mom, are really going to fall into three warnings. There's a warning against promiscuity, a warning against alcoholism or alcohol abuse, and then a warning against injustice. And that's going to make up this first section of Proverbs 31. So it begins, what are you doing, my son? This is a rhetorical question. What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? Son of my vows could mean a couple things. Maybe King Lemuel's mother made a vow to the Lord, like Hannah did for Samuel, that if she conceived and bore a son, that she would dedicate him to the Lord. And so maybe that is what Lemuel's mother is phrasing here. But I also think that it could just refer to the marriage vows. So within Proverbs 31, the order of the family and the natural order that God has ordained for people to exist in, man, woman, getting married, having children, this is a positive thing. And so Lemuel's mother is saying, yeah, you're the fulfillment of my vows to your father, my marriage vows, right? And so we have a responsibility to educate you, especially in the wisdom of the Lord, right? So she is identifying a very close relationship with her son and also her responsibility, for whatever reason, to bring him up in the fear and instruction of the Lord. And so she gives him this first piece of advice, verse 3. Do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. These are euphemisms for conjugal union, all right? Give your strength to women, your ways to destroy kings. Obviously, promiscuity and the seeking of many wives was very detrimental to the kings of Israel and Judah. Later on in Proverbs 31, we're going to see a reference, I believe, to Ruth and Ruth's connection. As she is praised, they give her the blessing that was given to the children of Tamar. And Tamar was actually the daughter-in-law of Judah, and there's a whole sordid history that happens there. And so the issue of seeking many wives or those outside of a marriage of one man, one woman is detrimental to all kinds of people in the Old Testament. And to the New and even today, right? So the mother is warning against this, particularly amongst the children of Jesse, the sons of Jesse, the descendants of Jesse, David, Solomon. They all had these issues, right? And so the first warning is, you know what, that you have opportunity to have many wives, but you really shouldn't. That's not what God wants for you. So that's our first piece of advice. Then we change themes, and we're going to move on for alcohol, right? It is not for kings, O Lemuel, or one dedicated to God. Remember that name could mean. It is not for kings to drink wine or for rulers to take strong drink. This doesn't mean that those particular forms of alcohol are bad. and beer is okay because it's not mentioned. That's not what's happening here. It's just the use, or rather the abuse of alcohol. Notice that she says it's not for kings. So, okay, here in Proverbs, what we see is that there is a discouragement about the abuse of alcohol, particularly for those in leadership positions, but also an encouragement for the use of alcohol for others. I do not find in the scriptures a prohibition against the responsible consumption of alcohol. In fact, you actually will find the opposite. All right? What is condemned here is drunkenness, drinking to a point where you lose your faculties, and also a warning against those in positions of power and leadership and authority from seeking wine above other pursuits and not being able to do their job. But if you're going to take away from the Bible this idea that all alcohol is bad, as even we did in this country at one time, you really don't have a lot of biblical support for that. And in fact, you're going to find the opposite. For example, Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 5:23, no longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and for your frequent ailments. And even Jesus himself, obviously gave wine to his disciples as part of the sacrament of the altar. And I would argue that, yes, you do need fermented grape wine to have a valid sacrament. I am not willing to fight you on that now. That's not the purpose of this Bible study, but if you want to talk in person about that, we can definitely talk in person about that. Bring your Hebrew skills, because we're going to look into that. But Jesus also gave wine to those at the wedding of Cana after they had drank up all the wine that the party had already. So it's not like like moderation is kind of hard to argue at the wedding at Cana too. Maybe, but so there's actually that. And then I love Matthew 11. So when John the Baptist, his messengers come and Jesus is talking about how great John is, right? Jesus talks about him, and he says how great John is, right? He is Elijah to come. What shall I compare this generation? All right. For John came neither eating nor drinking. Then they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend to tax collectors and sinners, yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. There was enough evidence for them to say that Jesus was a drunkard. So he's not talking about drinking water over here, all right? He's talking about drinking wine. And we assume that Jesus also partook at the wedding at Cana and other opportunities. We definitely know for the Passover, because fermented grape wine is required for the Passover celebration. All of that comes together. So the responsible consumption of alcohol is something that I think is allowed in scriptures and even commended. All right? And we're going to see that here in Proverbs. So it's not for kings, O Lemuel. It's not for kings to drink wine and for rulers to take strong drink, because lest they drink and forget what has been decreed. So lest they become addicted to too much wine, or they like revelry and they forget their job, or they have some memory loss about what they said was law. They pervert the rights of all the afflicted. They can't do their job if they're seeking just to party all the time. And so this is not a good thing. So prevent that temptation and just abstain from alcohol is the mother's advice. On the positive use side, we have verse 6. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. He said, give it to people who are not in positions of leadership, particularly those who are struggling. Now, this doesn't mean that we should placate those who are struggling with alcohol. Like, give the homeless a bunch of alcohol so they forget their problems and it'll warm them up for a little bit. Like, no, that's not the solution. That's not what they're talking about here. What we're talking about here is allow the people that revelry and that enjoyment of something that God has made, that they may forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. That's not a forever. That's just let them take a break from the daily striving. That's what I think is being presented here. And also in other places of Scripture, we see that the responsible use of alcohol is allowed and even commended in many places, whereas its abuse is, discouraged and condemned in many places. So The wisdom of God is portrayed right here in the wisdom of King Lemuel's mother. All right? And it's stuff we've seen before. I really don't think you can argue for a prohibition against all alcohol consumption as being appropriate for all Christians. I just don't see it in the Bible. Okay? So, verse 8, now that we've had the warning against promiscuity and we've had the warning against alcohol, now we're going to have a warning against injustice. Obviously, King Lemuel is a king, so he is in a position of authority and he has to judge, okay? And we see the wisdom of Proverbs is going to come to play in this whole thing once again. So the mother says, open your mouth for the mute. That doesn't mean those who are like physically incapable of speaking. It means those without a voice. And for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth and judge righteously. So speak up for those who don't have a voice and defend the rights of the poor and needy. This is a theme we've seen in Proverbs before, that rulers were to have a particular heart for those who were poor and needy. The wealthy could afford lawyers. The wealthy could afford bribes if they needed to, which, although evil, are effective in a lot of cases. But the poor have no recourse except to rely on those that God has placed in authority over them, particularly the king and the judge. And so God is calling those kings and those judges to righteousness, to fulfill their vocation in a godly way, which is a theme we'll see all through this chapter and also through the Bible. We actually have instilled this in our laws in this country. The reading of the Miranda rights when you get arrested. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you at no cost. Like, we actually think that that is worthwhile. That is a Christian concept, okay? It comes from the wisdom of God himself, and we are to have a heart for those who are in need, particularly in legal proceedings, because it can be easily trampled upon if not careful. This doesn't mean that we are to be partial to the poor. There's other proverbs and other scriptures that speak to that. Rather, we are to judge with equity and kindness and not be swayed one way or another. And yet, Proverbs here is acknowledging that there is a paywall often to proper legal representation and getting justice. And we'll see that even in parables that Jesus tells. So if we can, as individuals and society and perhaps people in leadership, sort of eliminate that disparity, that's a good thing, and we should work towards that. But we don't want it to become too partial to one side or the other, regardless of their wealth or status or any other status. So King Lemuel's mother gives him these 3 warnings. Don't seek after a harem like David and Solomon did. It's a way to lead you off into disaster. Don't be addicted to too much wine, nor forbid the people in your charge from having a little bit of enjoyment in something that God created. So there's both the prohibition and the allowance for alcohol use in its proper ways. And then finally, we see the warning against injustice, that those in authority should have a heart for the poor, but not be partial to the poor nor the great. And that is some of the wisdom that we've seen all throughout that Solomon gave to his own sons, that maybe King Lemuel's mother was familiar with. Maybe, probably, yeah. And she is imparting. And so because it is in accord with what Solomon wrote, inspired by the Holy Spirit, the scribes of Hezekiah said, hey, man, this is the same stuff. I think we should include it. Only makes sense to me, okay? So that's the first section. And next, we're going to switch over for Proverbs 31, where we're going to talk about the qualities of a godly woman, Proverbs 31 type woman, right? All of that that you see on the internet and memes all over the place and books and all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested in that, stick around. I'm going to break here, and then I got to splice it all together, and hopefully you won't see too big of a problem. All right? Hopefully this works for you. I'll see you on the other side. Hello. Can you hear me now? Good. Hopefully everything's working fine now. Proverbs 31, right? Okay. So you may have come across many books or many posts on the internet about being a Proverbs 31 woman. And you say, well, what does that mean? And you go and you read Proverbs 31 and you skip over the first 9 chapters and you move to the 10 through 31, and you see all of these things that a woman should do, at least in the eyes of Proverbs, that she's praised for. And there's a whole, I call it ministry, there's a whole market for Proverbs 31 stuff for women. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Striving to be and have the virtues that are portrayed in Scripture, particularly Proverbs chapter 31, is a good and laudable goal. But I think you have to interpret them, right? Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of weaving. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get into the text and see where the text takes us. All right. The woman who fears the Lord. So again, this is an entirely different section from what came before. I still think it's probably the wisdom of Hezekiah or Lemuel, whoever he was. But I do think it's a definite section because it's an acrostic poem. We're going to see categories of qualities that the author believes a good godly woman should have, an excellent wife, with an eye towards marriage, obviously. They're going to basically be structured into three different categories: faith, her skills, and then her accomplishments, okay? And we're going to see praises in all of those ways. So if you're going to strive to be a Proverbs 31 woman, those are the three areas that you're going to concentrate on. And there's actually within the text 7 qualities that are praised falling into those three categories. And 7 is not by accident. Of course, that is the number for godly perfection. And so the center of being a godly woman, a Proverbs 31 woman, is going to be faith. All right? We're definitely going to see that. Okay? So we'll go through those 7. Well, I'll give them to you right now. Okay? Faith. She benefits her husband. Wise speech and good works. She's an expert at crafts. She's industrious. She benefits her family, commercially, actually. And finally, she is strong. So those are the 7 qualities that are praised throughout this section of Proverbs 31, and you can see how they fall into those 3 categories of faith, skills, and accomplishments. Okay? So now, let's look at this. An excellent wife, who can find? That's a rhetorical question. She is far more precious than jewels. This excellent wife, the Hebrew here is used only 2 other times in the Old Testament. One is in another section of Proverbs, and it's actually kind of if I remember correctly, it's in a negative sense. It's a woman that's pretending, and she's actually the harlot. So the positive sense is actually a reference to Ruth, my favorite woman in all of the Old Testament, probably in the whole Bible, I think. Yeah, Ruth is my favorite. I love the story of Ruth. I love what happens there. I love the foreshadowing, and I love the history that it leads to. So, Ruth chapter 3, particularly verse 11, is where we have the positive use of this woman language, this strong, faithful woman. So Ruth is going out to talk to Boaz. She is down at the threshing floor, right? Boaz is sleeping there. And she lies at his feet because she wants to talk to him and say, hey, you're my redeemer. You need to redeem me, right? And so he wakes up and she's there and he's, who are you? He says, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. But she's actually sought the way that God has established for her to be redeemed. So Boaz is actually a relative of her dead husband, okay? And so she is seeking what God has established, even though she's a pagan. She was a Moabite, right? She is converted when she came with Naomi. And she's learned the way that God has established for her to be restored, and now she is seeking that. And so she seeks out Boaz and reminds him of this job that he has. And now, my daughter, do not fear, for I will do for you all that you ask. For all my townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. This is the same phrase in Hebrew that is used back here when it talks about an excellent wife, okay? It's the same. So Ruth is going to play a big part in the Proverbs 31. And I think that Hezekiah, or at least Lemuel, knew the story of Ruth pretty well. And I think there is reference here because it occurs at both the beginning and the end. Ruth bookends Proverbs 31. And so I think that Ruth is the pinnacle example of what it means to be a godly woman. Even though we might not want our daughters to go and hang out at the threshing floor in the middle of the night with some dude, right? Maybe that was a little bit bold on Naomi's part, but knowing the righteousness of Boaz and the righteousness of Ruth, there wasn't any real worry there. But they do rise early in the morning lest they be seen together, right? And people start talking, right? He says, it is true that I'm a redeemer. And then Boaz also shows his righteousness in saying, there is a redeemer nearer than I. He's saying, you're right, it is my task, but there is somebody in the order that's closer. So let's see what he does. And if he doesn't, then it's to me and I will do it. So he makes that promise. All right? Okay, so that's Ruth. Who can find a Ruth is basically what Lemuel Hezekiah says. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Okay, so an excellent wife who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. Remember, all throughout Proverbs, we talked about how wisdom is more precious than jewels and wealth and all of that, and it's difficult to find. Okay, it's also that God has to give it. It's kind of the same thing with spouses. God actually brings us together. We confess that in the marriage rite. What God has joined together, let no one rent asunder. We see that in Adam and Eve, all of that. God puts humanity back together in a marriage. That all of that is present here. So why is she wise, like more precious than jewels? Well, because she fears the Lord. So really, we're talking about an excellent wife is one who is faithful, like Ruth was faithful to Yahweh. All right. So at the end, we'll kind of run through, if you really want to be a Proverbs 31 woman, what does that mean? We'll talk about that at the end. But right here, we see the first of our qualities, faithfulness. And now in verse 11, we see that she benefits her husband, the second of those qualities. And the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. This isn't because the husband is worth more and the woman is a servant. It's that they work together. They're meant to work together. And so they both benefit. He trusts, he receives. So he gives trust, he receives. It's a reciprocity in the marriage relationship that is supposed to be there. So try not, as we read this, read our own modern ideas of patriarchy and male dominance and this idea that women were subservient and they needed to be in their place. Try not to read all of that into this and just let the word speak to our vocations, and our vocations are different. Men and women are different by design, biological, genetic design. We are different, okay? So let's just acknowledge that. Dear Lord. Verse 12, she does him good and not harm all the days of her life. Obviously, we want that, right? So verse 13, we see this beginning of the qualities of she's crafty in a good way, right? She seeks wool and flax, so she gathers up the raw materials and works with willing hands. This is going to be one of the primary qualities of this Proverbs 31 woman, that she is going to be industrious. Laziness is kind of the big warning for the Proverbs 31 woman. But also, it's a warning all throughout Proverbs for men and women alike. Remember all the Proverbs we talked about those, the sloth? You remember the sloth and the sluggard, right? Okay. So laziness is a poor quality for anybody. So don't look at this, oh, yeah, the woman's got to work. No. Again, try not to read into this and just take the words for what they say. But industriousness is going to be a big quality of the godly woman. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. That takes work. She's got to go down to the market and procure and haul it back. So that's all part of this. She rises while it is yet night. She provides food for her household. So here's a sacrificial giving, right? She's not just doing this for herself, she's doing it for everybody. Portions for her maidens, even those who are less than her in the house, she is serving. This is a quality right after the pattern of our Lord Jesus Christ, who rose and served his disciples at that Last Supper, right? So here we see that she is faithful in what she does as well. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. It is unsure whether or not in the culture of the time she could legally buy property. I don't know. That may be the patriarchy raising its ugly head at this, that she couldn't buy property. But the Bible does say this. So even if what she has to do because of the laws at the time is to say, hey, husband, did you notice that vineyard for sale, that land over there? It looks really great. I would love to plant that. So I think we have enough money for it. I've done the calculations. Can you go down to the gate and buy it tomorrow? And he says, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Good job on all that research. Thank you. It sounds like a great idea. And they go, okay? Maybe that's how it happened. Or maybe the laws of the time did permit her to just acquire it. I don't know. I couldn't find that. So either way, she is the one who is initiating this agricultural venture. Let's call it that, okay? That takes work. It took investigation. It takes saving. It takes all kinds of stuff, calculations. So there's a lot of qualities that are in that considers a field and buys it. Even if she does have to utilize the authority of her husband in the legal process, in order to do it, there's a relationship that's built there too. A relationship where the husband isn't like, oh, woman, what do you know? Or like, why are you telling this? He doesn't become defensive, but they've built a relationship that goes all the way back up here, right? The heart of her husband trusts in her. That is won over time through many small decisions too, right? And also big decisions. So there's a good positive relationship that is happening here, even in the marriage, to allow this to happen and to make it happen. With the fruit of her hands, so again, that industrious hard work, she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength. She makes her arms strong. This doesn't mean that she pumps some iron, although it might. I think it's more talking about, again, her industrious nature. We're going to see a lot of Proverbs 31 that is mirrored in the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs. Now, the Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, actually, if this was written by Hezekiah, or at least during Hezekiah's time, Song of Solomon precedes this chapter of Proverbs by quite a bit. So it's actually, you could say that Proverbs 31 is borrowing a lot from Song of Solomon. However, we're not doing Song of Solomon as a study, so if you go and study it, you're going to see a lot of the same things. So please understand that the timeline here, that Song of Solomon came first. Proverbs 31 is borrowing a lot from that. You're going to see similar language talked about. Whereas Song of Solomon is more about the aesthetic beauty and just the love of two people that God has made to be together. Proverbs 31 is really about like accomplishments and skills and what they do. The Song of Solomon is about more the way they look, at least to their lover. So that's all. You put both of them together and you have what a relationship is supposed to be. It's a little bit of both, okay? So you're going to have to study Song of Solomon on your own because we're not ready to do that online yet. We'll have to have the TV MA up most of the time for that one, or at least the TV 14. So she makes her arms strong. In Song of Solomon, there's a lot of talk about the lover's arms, right? And so this is talking more about the industriousness rather than their beauty, okay? But they're beautiful in the strength and industrious that they have. So she perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Again, there's a lot that goes into that. Yeah, it's not just that she, makes widgets and thinks that they should sell for $100 a piece and nobody buys them. Like, no, she's done some research and she's done some work. Her lamp does not go out at night. It was One of the tasks, usually of the woman of the house, to make sure that the lamps had enough oil to last throughout the night in case somebody had to get up in the middle of the night and use the restroom. So you didn't just flip on a light switch. Jesus also talks about this as the wise virgins who light their lamp and keep them burning. It's a metaphor for the church, that the church is constantly to have the lamps burning and be ready to go when the bridegroom calls in the middle of the night, and to be watchful and to be ready. So this is a theme that actually runs throughout the entire Bible, and we're seeing a woman that is faithful and also thinking about the future and being sacrificial in her sleep to make sure that her family and others are provided for, all good, godly qualities. She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. Again, if you really want to be a literal Proverbs 31 woman, you're going to be doing a lot of weaving. Again, I think this is more about the industriousness and the willingness to do hard work. She opens her hand to the poor, so she's also generous. She reaches out her hands to the needy, something that we saw praised even of men throughout the book of Proverbs. And so we see that applies both to women and men. Proverbs 31 at the end is kind of like that whole thing where these days we have to like educate people on things that we used to know. So we used to be able to talk about the race of men, or in the creed, who for us men and for our salvation, right? And everybody understood that meant mankind, humankind, all of us, male and female together, right? And then we read into too much, and then we started to change things and said, oh, that's biased and sexist, because what about womankind? And like, oh, God, we're all included in humanity, all right? We get bogged down in these terms, and we think we got to change them because somebody's being offended. It just is an ignorance on our use of language that we've had. So it's kind of like Proverbs all through is talking Solomon to his sons, right? And you're going to have to, well, what about all the women? And then Proverbs like, okay, if you didn't figure out that all this was applicable to men and women, adults and children, old people, young people, people black, white, rich and poor, let us just clarify, and we'll put this thing at the end to say, yes, women are included too, and the same rules apply. It's kind of the feeling you get from this, but that's something because of our modern peculiarities. So she is generous. She reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. This word for scarlet could also mean double layered. I don't really know which way it should be, but both are kind of sensible. It doesn't really matter. But you understand the thrust of the proverb, right? That she's not afraid of what's coming down because she's prepared. She's done the work beforehand. And that's another quality, is that it's not someone who is just impulsive. Like, she actually considers what's coming down the road and preparing for it. So there's a lot of cases where women control the family funds, because if it was left up to the husband and father, he would spend it all on baseball cards before you even bought groceries or something like that. So sometimes we need that. And again, husband and wife working together is the goal here. We don't want a husband who's not fulfilling his vocation either. But we don't want a wife who's not fulfilling her vocation either. So we gotta kind of do both. They both work together, right? What a concept. She makes bed coverings for herself. Again, if you want to be a Proverbs 31 woman, you can do a lot of weaving, a lot of sewing. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates. So here we see that her husband is doing his vocation as well. He is known in the gates. The gates were the place of legality and socialization and everything. So he is not some recluse. He is not a dastardly fellow that other people don't want to hang out with. He's not a sluggard who's not doing things. No, he's doing the things that he's supposed to be doing. He has a good reputation, and that's part of the marriage and the family as well. When he sits among the elders of the land, so he's known. He's fulfilling his vocation and doing it well as well. She makes linen garments and sells them. Okay, so here is justification for your home side hustle, right? She delivers sashes to the merchant. So she not only consumes, but she also contributes. A couple of Proverbs ago, we talked about that you could rob your house from the inside, that family members who aren't pulling their own weight or aren't contributing are really detracting from the success of the family, and they could really drag a family down. So if your wife is hanging out at home all day, just spending money and consuming stuff, then that doesn't do the family very much good. So when we are all fulfilling our vocations, then a family runs in a good way, right? And it relies on everybody, husband and wife, parents and children, to contribute and not just consume. So here we see that she has gone out of the previous verses and gathered the raw materials. She's gone home and she's been industrious, and now she is contributing to another aspect of family life that maybe she doesn't even have to, because she's not the breadwinner, right? Her husband is out working home. She's doing the household stuff. Both need to be done. But now she actually is contributing to that side. She doesn't say, well, that's not my job, that's his job, right? And if you had both husband and wife going above and beyond, not only fulfilling their vocation, but then doing a little bit extra, isn't that great? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, it's kind of an ideal. So again, Proverbs 31 is more than just for women. It's for all families and all for us. Strength and dignity are her clothing. She laughs at the time to come because she's prepared. She's ready. She opens her mouth with wisdom. And again, remember, wisdom is a gift from God in Proverbs. So if she opens her mouth with wisdom, that means that she has taken in the wisdom of God through the reading of his word. She is faithful. Again, that's the secret to being a Proverbs 31 woman or all of Proverbs man, is wisdom from the Lord. It's the beginning of all wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We saw that in the very first proverb, and now we're going to see it here. And the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Kindness, one of the particularly feminine qualities, right? And it should be, and it's beautiful. So again, if you are to aspire to something, to be faithful and to be kind, wow, those are some pretty good virtues. She looks well to the ways of her household. It's her vocation. It's not demeaning in any way. Those things need to be done. Good for her. Does not eat the bread of idleness. That's industriousness. One of the biggest themes throughout the whole thing is that a godly woman is industrious. She is not just sitting around doing nothing. There's always something to be done inside the house, outside the house, and that is to her praise and glory, even if it does seem like busy work, housework. Sweeping floors isn't glorious, but it needs to be done. And somebody who can do that cheerfully and faithfully to the best of their ability, that's pleasing to God. The same way that a lawyer being a lawyer to the best of his ability, a garbage man being a garbage man, a mail carrier being the best mail carrier that they can be. All of that, parents, husbands, neighbors, citizens, friends, church members, in addition to our occupations, doing that to the best of our ability is God-pleasing. That's the Lutheran teaching of vocation. And it's only our sinful ideas that imagine that one is worth more than the other. Martin Luther remarked something like a father changing his baby's diaper makes the angels in heaven rejoice, right? Just doing the things that are required for being a parent that nobody else sees and nobody else would praise. So fulfilling our vocations and being industrious at them is God-pleasing, and it's beneficial to ourselves, to our family, and also to our community. So if we're going to aspire to something, that's something that we should do. Don't eat the bread of idleness. Find something to do that benefits your family or those around you. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Well, of course they do. Look at all of the stuff that she does and how great she is. Her husband also, he praises her. Of course he does, right? He doesn't have to go out to the gate and say, oh, yeah, man. Yep, she doesn't do anything. Yep. Nope. I come home and there's just stacks of Amazon boxes outside the door. That's it. Yep. Flax and linen They're just sitting there. Nothing ever happens with them. Yeah. No, he doesn't have to, right? And the converse is true. His wife's not talking to her girlfriend saying like, oh yeah, the bum doesn't even go to work. Yep, had opportunity to do some overtime around the Christmas season and didn't. And now we can't afford presents. Or, she doesn't have to complain either. Again, it's both sides doing what they're called to do that makes things run so well. So Proverbs 31 is not just about women any more than Proverbs about the sons of the king are meant just for men. 29. Many women have done excellently. This is her husband speaking, but you surpass them all. Don't you want your husband to think of you that way? Don't you want your wife to think of you that way? And so Hezekiah, Lemuel, is actually laying out a way for you to kind of do that, or at least to aspire to have that sort of reputation in your own family, right? And then finally this ending, which is so wonderful. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain. Okay? But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, industriousness again, and let her works praise her in the gates. So before we saw that her husband is known in the gates, right? And now we're seeing that what she has done, her reputation will praise her in the gates. And this, I think, also is a reference to Ruth. In Ruth 4, after Boaz redeems Ruth, they go up to the gate, right? The Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. He says, do you want to redeem Ruth, the Moabite? And he says, I can't, right? So Boaz does redeem Ruth, right? And it's way down here. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. That's a big praise because Ruth was a Moabite. God swore off anybody from Moab because of their betrayal. And yet God's mercy gets the better of him, and Ruth is redeemed by a man from Bethlehem. The one who is cast off completely is redeemed by a dude from Bethlehem. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now, this is funny because Tamar is actually Judah's daughter-in-law. When her husband died, right, and Judah did not find a remarriage or didn't give the one that he said he would marry her to, she dressed up as a prostitute, enticed Judah, slept with her father-in-law, became pregnant to twins, the first of which is Perez. And guess what? That's the descendant of Jesus' line. So Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. She conceived, bore a son. The women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. She is praised in the gate. Her works praise her in the gates, right? They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Isn't that interesting? Now, these are the generations of Perez, the child of incest. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Aminadab. Aminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. All on down the line. So redemption there. And Ruth, even though she was a Moabite, she becomes the pinnacle of womanhood, of faithful womanhood that we see represented in Proverbs 31. And charm is deceitful, beauty is vain. Song of Solomon is really on the beauty part. And again, that's part of a marriage. It's part of a male-female attraction. It's important, right? But those things are fleeting. A woman who fears the Lord is really what to be looked at. And this is advice for all those who would seek a spouse, male and female. Find somebody that fears the Lord, are wise in that way. Fun fact, we talked about the Proverbs 31 woman's arms being strong, right? I didn't ever notice this until we studied Ruth in Bible class. And Ruth must have had some killer arms, because the amount of grain that Boaz gives her to take home, which is probably a several mile walk, is like 75 pounds of grain. So she's trucking like 70, 80 pounds of grain for several miles back home every time she goes to see Boaz. I mean, so this Ruth probably had some killer arms. So I really do think that Proverbs 31 has in mind a picture of Ruth, and so I like that because I love Ruth. So maybe you see that, maybe you don't. So in summary here, if you want to be a Proverbs 31 woman, what should you aspire to? Well, first and foremost, be faithful. That's all through Proverbs. It's all through Proverbs 31. It is the heart and the beginning of all wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs started out with that, and now it ends with that, okay? Second, be industrious at your vocation, whatever that is, and everything that is. So it means in the home. It means outside of the home. It means in whatever you set your hand to try to do it to the best of your ability and not eat the bread of idleness. This is advice that's given to everybody throughout Proverbs. And so it makes sense then that it would appear here in Proverbs 31 at the end of saying, hey, if you want to be a godly person, be industrious. And then finally, be sacrificial, okay? Throughout Proverbs 31, we see that actually living for other people, of giving up your comfort and your time for the benefit of others. If everybody did that, it'd be a great, great world, right? Especially in the family. And remember, in Proverbs, what happens on the individual level affects the family, and then the family level affects the society. We see that all through Proverbs, all revealed there. So if you want to be a Proverbs 31 woman or a Proverbs man, we'd say be faithful, go to church, and be involved in Bible study. And I mean serious Bible study, okay? There's a lot of stuff out there that's Bible study, but it's milk. So, yeah. So, stuff like Portals of Prayer, great resource, right? But it's really milk, okay? It's basic. It's meant for short kind of things to just get you started. This is not going to be in-depth Bible study. You might learn something from it, but it's just a starting point, okay? And then kind of the next level are books like things with women's small group studies. Sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they're very surfacey. Kind of read the verse and then what word does God describe his people in verse 5? And you write it on the blank, then you move on. So these are, if Portals of Prayer are like milk, these are like crackers in a lot of cases. We actually have a number of really faithful Proverbs 31 type women that are writing books as well. So there are books by our deaconesses and people that have studied at seminary. They have books out there that go into greater depth and deal with more difficult topics. And some of them really go on to deal with some really difficult topics, writing at the highest levels of theology and scholarship, and a lot of them are our deaconesses, but not all of them. This book is actually the second edition. You want the third edition if you're going to pick this one up, because it actually has the articles from a lot of our deaconesses. The second edition didn't, and I kind of regret getting the second edition when I saw what came out in the third, but I'm stuck with it. Anyway, what I'm saying here is wherever you start from, right, continue to grow, and that's important. So whatever you're doing, be in Bible study. Your church, your pastor is the resource for that, okay? We'll get into deeper Bible study, even what we can do here online, okay? So continue to grow in your understanding. Be faithful, be industrious at whatever your vocation is, both your job, your occupation, and also your household duties, both male and female. We all have them, all right? So go above and beyond, okay? We see that in Proverbs. And then be sacrificial. There's this big trend these days where I can't adult today. Like, get over it, okay? Guess what? We live in one of the most leisurely times in the world. We don't have to grow our own food. We don't have to go down the well to get water. All right. So this idea that we can't handle life with all of our comforts and technologies and things done for us is really kind of a thing that we have to get beyond. All right. It's the bread of idleness described as disguised. That's the word. It's the bread of idleness described as a mental health crisis. I'm not saying that there isn't a mental health crisis. We've talked about that, right? But so often we use it as an excuse not to get off our butts and go do the work that's in front of us. All right? People are counting on us, and it's beneficial to us, and it's beneficial to our family, and it's beneficial to our society. Be faithful, be industrious, and also be sacrificial. All things that we see in the book of Proverbs. Thank you for studying along with me this entire series. I can't believe we've done 31 chapters already. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you've had a few laughs along the way. I really thank you for joining me and also telling me that you're watching. We have the comments turned off because we don't want to deal with spam and all that. So when you see me or send me a message and say, hey, I'm watching Proverbs, I really appreciate that, because this wouldn't be any fun if I knew that nobody was watching it. I'm going to take a break for Christmas and Easter. And then in the new year, my plan is to come back for Ecclesiastes. That's my plan. More wisdom of Solomon, right? In the vein of that. So if you're interested in learning about Ecclesiastes, subscribe to the channel. There's like a button or a bell down below. I don't know. All the famous YouTube people go, remember to hit that button and hit that subscribe down below. And I don't know where that is. I have no idea. But that'll let you know the next time we upload a video, and then you'll see like, oh, it's time for Ecclesiastes. At least that's my plan, God willing. Once again, thank you. God bless. Have a Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I hope you really know the joy of Christ in your home. I would like to speak peace and blessing upon your family and your situation, and ask you continue to pray for all of us in ministry during this time, because it's a busy, busy time. And we love you and we love to do it. It just, it takes a toll. So afterwards, give us a break. Okay? Please. All right. Love you all. Thank you very much. Last week's study up above right here. And God bless you. And I'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.